games that already have a large wishlist following will come out with a multiplier effect. The biggest challenge with this game was I felt like I was kind of doing the same thing from minute 1 to minute 10.
People listen to advice from YouTubers. They don't necessarily understand all the reasons behind it. This is just another example of why so many people will tell you to start with small games.
This would be a caution to other indie developers. Steam is not there to promote every single game. Their job is to promote the games that sell well.
A tutorial really isn't just to teach the player how to play the game. It's supposed to teach the player why your game is fun.
Everyone has to bring their own audience.
A large majority of game design is not the rules of the game, it's making sure the players understand the rules of the game. Not only did it not have a tutorial, but it was extremely obscure to try to figure out the game just by playing it. I don't think this is an exaggeration. I spent maybe 25% of my time developing the level and the mechanics, and 75% of my time just trying to polish the UI and UX to make it extremely clear to players.
I didn't actually play any of these 3 games. The reason why I made time for the games above was because those people, we had good dialogue and they were very active, because it's a give and take. And when I have to make that choice, I'm going to give it to the people who I know are like kind of active community members, show up for the long run, not just for the moments when you need something from someone else.
In this episode, I talked to Connor of Sunday Brunch Studios about how games can succeed in Steam's NextFest. We get into marketing and how to make a compelling demo through the lens of giving feedback on games from Blake's Dev Dream Discord. I say in this episode, but this is my first time doing this type of video, and I'm not sure yet if it will be a regular podcast. But if you think it should, leave a comment with your suggestions for what I should name the podcast. Now, my conversation with Connor. I was wondering if you could start with just sharing a bit about your history with gaming and game development and how you got into it.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Really appreciate the chance to talk to you and everything. So my background, I think it's important to start back in college only because there was a path where I actually didn't become anything related to computer science. When I was applying for schools, university, previously I was applying everywhere for physics. And I also had one school that I was applying to for pre-law, just because I was like, oh, like I enjoy talking and debating, so maybe I'd want to do that for a job. Or for physics, it was one of the classes that I enjoyed. But growing up, I was always doing something with video games. Some of my earliest memories was actually using Toolkit 2, I think it was called RPG Toolkit 2, but the executable on my dad's computer was just called Toolkit 2. And so I just made like very, very simple games. I don't even think I got into scripting. It was just whatever was basically there. And then in middle school, I think I had an action replay for the DS where I learned about hexadecimal, scanning for values, and all those different things. Again, I didn't really build anything. I just was kind of learning those skills. So there was a point where I had kind of applied everywhere, and one school came through and they said, hey, it's February, March, after all applications have been sent. And they said, hey, there's one more opportunity where you could apply to our school, and, we'll process your application, and, we'll let you know. And as I was going through those lists of majors that I could pick, I saw computer science engineering. And I said, you know what? Forget what my parents say. Forget what anybody says. I just want to make video games. And so that was the major that I picked. And after visiting the school and everything, I got accepted and, was deciding if I wanted to go there. But after going to the school, being in that place and knowing that I was going to go there for learning programming really resonated with me. And, long story short, one of the best classes that I took at the school was actually in just software development, looking at how you build products, working with a team. And we built a music notes app where you could use a visual note-taking with a music staff to replay MIDI songs. And going through that experience was so enjoyable that I was like, okay, I know that I need to be doing computer science. And in the back of my mind, I think I planted the idea where even though I wasn't doing game development, I knew that it was something that I would, end up reaching in the future. So as I got into full-time work and everything, there reached a point where I was getting that creative urge to make games again, make something that was fun, and really do the art, do everything that was involved with making video games. And so roughly around 2024, that's when I started getting back into game development, learning Godot, learning Blender a little bit more, doing all the tutorials. I followed all of the Heartbeast tutorials. And since then, I'm just like trying to find more and more ways to get involved in the community and just keep honing my skills and everything.
So you mentioned the DS. I was wondering if you had a preferred platform growing up. Like, did you see yourself as a PC gamer first, or were you more of a handheld or console gamer?
Yeah, for me at least, I think I was a console gamer, specifically Nintendo. I grew up in the 90s, so For me, it was like all those 90s cartoons, 90s games. Pokemon, of course, was huge. But the Game Boy Advance was probably the console or handheld console that was the most impactful for me. And some of my favorite games came from that genre. And I think that even the way that I look at games now, especially with the Steam Deck, I really want to bring back that idea of handheld gaming, and in particular the link cable, where I have so many memories of playing games with friends over the link cable, over like that wireless, and that's something that you really don't get from PC gaming. And so while I did play, Warcraft 3 and some of those other games that were on the PC, I played a ton of League of Legends. I think there's this like soft spot in my heart where I just want to like go back simpler and say like, what was it about the Game Boy Advance that led to all these games that I think people fondly remember, even though there was like graphical constraints, there was storage constraints as to like what you could actually put on the cartridge and stuff, even going back to like the Game Boy games. And there's something about that, those experiences and stories that were told on that platform that I feel like has something to be said in 2026,
Yeah.
where there's like almost no constraints of what you can do. I think there's still something there that can bring back that in-person experience of gaming.
Definitely. What were some of your favorite games on the Game Boy Advance?
Yeah, at least for me, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is like the number one for me. In a couple of years back, I actually started getting into speedrunning for that game. So if you go to the speedrun.com for FFTA, you can actually see some of my records. I think on any percent, I'm number 2. And one of the other categories, I'm number 1. But it was just so much fun to go back to that game and revisit it from like, how do I just like break this? Turns out when you take a really long tactical RPG and try to speedrun it, it's still not very fast.
Yeah.
So it's all relative. But that one definitely for sure was one that I think informed me quite a bit. And then Shining Soul 2 was one that I didn't play a ton of, but I always loved the idea of it. I guess looking back, it's kind of like Diablo or some of like those other games where you're going through and building up your character. But that one stood out. And then Golden Sun, I played a ton of that game, just like creating all the different builds, like finding all the different spells and stuff and doing that exploration. I would just like start a new game just because I loved going through the beginning and just exploring that space. So, those pretty much were the top 3. In addition to like the Mega Man Battle.net. There's so many like honorable mentions, but
of course.
like every game on that system was like a hit for me.
Yeah, for us, the Game Boy, it was mostly the Zelda games that we really spent a lot of time in. It's similarly for like just exploring the world and everything.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of funny you mentioned speedrunning Final Fantasy, because that's not a type of game I would usually think of being speedrun. I'm kind of curious, do you know of any like modern indie game that has been built around that concept of like a turn-based RPG that you speedrun?
A turn-based RPG that you speedrun. Well, I'm trying to think of something like Wargroove or a game like that, where I don't know if they have speedrunning for like the main campaigns. But in general, I don't think that there's too many like tactical, like that kind of style of tactical games, whether it's like an Advanced Wars clone or Deliverant. I'm drawing a blank on the word, but derivative. There we go. We got there. But it's really interesting because I think that the audience of people who want to have that slow tactical thought process of planning things out is kind of in conflict with the idea of going fast. And it's, no surprise that in general, when you look at Games Done Quick, GDQ, that a lot of them end up being platformers or these games where you can like explore the space and get out of boundaries, rather than being like these tactical games. I remember, speaking of Warcraft 3, one of the speedrunners who did that campaign, and that's a game that you would be like, well, there's like time-based maps and things like that too. So there's kind of this niche of like players who want that experience of making quick decisions, but also not worrying that they won't have time to explore every single aspect. So I can't think of an example other than, games that just kind of are indie games that naturally have that tactics base. But I don't know if it would be a popular enough game to really make it happen too.
It would be an interesting idea to explore sometime maybe, but something you said, we were talking earlier about like Warcraft 3 mods, and you played some tower defenses. My brother actually made like sort of a competitive speedrunning tower defense. It was called Panic TD. And it was a multiplayer head-to-head, but it was like you had to build towers basically as fast as you could because waves would not stop.
Yeah.
There's like no wait whatsoever. It was kind of an interesting concept. But we had also talked about, and we'll probably get to this more later if we have time for it, of cursed design problems. And that's kind of like a great example of a cursed design problem, was trying to make a turn-based game into something you can speedrun. So that would be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that in terms of incremental games where, I was wondering, like, is there a way to make an incremental game that you could speedrun, or like with Panic TD, or the idea of that, one where each other player forces you to think about how you most optimally get to the end of the tech tree, right?
Yeah.
Because incremental games are traditionally a single player style. You're going through, you kind of know that it's going to be however many hours that the developer intended for. But then what if you put that in a environment where you're actually trying to go through as quickly as possible, and you play with your friends to do like these different runs? Like, what might that look like? It's very interesting once you start like looking at it from like going fast, and totally like you're talking about with the curse problems. You put all these different things together, and it's like, what emerges out of that, and then is that interesting, or is it just cursed?
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably won't have time to explore this fully, but I actually think that the game I'm working on currently, Goblins for Good, is actually an incremental that you could speedrun fairly well, because it's kind of combines incremental games with RTS. And if you just have the right strategy, you can actually beat the level significantly faster than I intend the average player to. For an example, like, you can focus more on your goblin stats than on some of like the gold and income upgrades. And then there's not really any game mechanic preventing you from just going right for the castle to win the level immediately, and just like ignoring the rest of the level, which I may eventually have to add something, but like most people, that's not their instinct anyway, so it hasn't really been a problem yet. But I did think it would be fun to like have a leaderboard for speedruns in the game and have it split by which charity you support. So like, you're not just competing for the fastest speed, you're trying to get the fastest speed for the charity you're endorsing, and beating the other ones. So
yeah. I think that's an interesting idea. And when I had played the game, that was one of the ideas that I thought of just like that feeling of, oh, I wonder like how I can change my strategy as I'm going through, and is there a way to go through it a little bit more quicker, get the resources. So definitely, it's awesome to hear that your mindset was kind of in that same space of like, how might you create that experience so players can discover it? Because that's exactly where my mind went as a player, like experiencing it over time.
Yeah, I'm hoping to make some tweaks with that in mind, but at the end of the day, it is it's kind of like you said before, most people don't go into an incremental game looking for a fastest possible experience. So I feel like it would be somewhat of a waste of my development time to lean too heavily into it. Maybe it could be a post-release DLC, but so back to your college experience, you had mentioned that you had initially done like undergrad, but now you're going back for grad school. Is that right?
Yeah. So kind of where we pick up in the story is I've been at work for a number of years. I actually started as an engineer, switched into management, and so I was getting further and further away from that time where I could actually go and create things. So now it was more about like working with other people, teaching them, and like looking at processes. And so I was really getting that itch, which again like kind of led to, okay, I just want to make my own games and have this creative space. But as I was doing that, I was kind of realizing, listening to all the different game dev YouTubers and Chris Z and people like that, where it was becoming evident that making a good game wasn't enough. And I think that I land somewhere in between biz dev, where it's like, oh, profit and all these different things, and the artistic side of you have to make that experience. And I felt like I was missing those skills that would, one, allow me just to make the game. So I needed to work on that in general, but I felt confident I could learn that. But then two was, why might you want to create a business, or how do you do something like marketing or branding? And a lot of these terms I know now, but I didn't know at the time. I just knew that I was missing those skills, especially because I was coming from an engineering background. That was just not something that I was taught on the job either. And so I really saw this grad program as a way to upskill. And so the specific degree is a Master's of Science in Integrated Design, Business, and Technology. And that program is really meant to take all the things that I was experiencing and saying, okay, no matter which pillar you're coming from, we're going to supplement it with these other ones and create a more rounded experience so that you can see kind of the overview of everything together. And their, I guess, pitch or ideal was that they're creating the curriculum for the jobs that don't exist today. because they had the foresight when they had created the academy that people were not going to be able to have these skills that taught, that cross-disciplinary work. And so they wanted to get ahead of that and then create the leaders of tomorrow, essentially, by saying, hey, we think that we're going to make this bet that you're going to need all these different skills together. And from now, I think I'm like the 10th or 11th cohort or something like that. But I think it's becoming true, especially with how AI is, getting people to rethink all these different skills. And at least for me, I want to do it as human as possible so I can connect with other people. But in that, I need to like hone my taste, learn these skills. And I'm a year into the program right now. And so far, it definitely has been paying off. And I feel like I just am exposed to so many more ideas.
How many years do you have left in that program?
Yeah, so I think it's 38 units or something like that, and so I'm actually have one semester left, or I'm trying to finish it in one more semester, and then switch back into just like focus on game dev. And I think that's really been the biggest challenge for me, is balancing full-time work with the program, in addition to trying to find time to then do game dev on top of it. But fortunately, since I started the program, every single class when they're like, "Oh, what are you focused on?" I just tell people, "I'm doing games. I'm doing games." So anytime that I can work on a project and tie it to Sunday Brunch Studios or just a game concept, I find a way to weave it in and kind of double down on what I'm learning.
Yeah, I want to loop back to Sunday Brunch Games, but I was just curious
Sure.
if you have a plan for like what kind of game or project you're going to launch into right after you finish this program.
Yeah, I have no plan.
No plan.
But it's by design, because one thing I've been learning is that product validation is really, really important. And this is where it's like, this is one of those key ideas of biz dev applied in a way that takes it away from just a business mindset that can become part of the art side of things. And like, how do you shift that from one into the center? And for me, at least, I now look at designing games as not what I want to create, but creating an experience that other people are interested in and really speaking to them. And it's not my job to showcase how smart I am as a developer. It's my job to talk to other people, talk to players, understand their wants and needs, and be the person who comes in and says, how can I, one, create an experience that aligns with that, but then two, how can I communicate it in such a way that a person understands that that experience is for them? And that's really what I think marketing is. It's not, oh, I'm trying to sell as many copies and reach the biggest audience. It's how do I shake people and go, this game is for you, you should play it, right? Or cause other people to go to their friends and say, this game is for us, let's play it together. And I think it really helped me think of marketing again as something that's more natural. And it's like, of course I want people to play my game. Like if I make a game that's just for myself, I could do that, and that's no problem. Maybe it'll appeal to some other people, but I also may have something that people don't want to play. And then at that point, if no one wants to play my game, am I really, making a game? I don't know.
I've always had this concept of making games for other people in the back of my mind. It started out like when I was younger, it was for my siblings, but it's always been pretty natural to translate that into making it for a specific audience. So I've never quite related to people who struggle with that as much. But I think it's sometimes still easier said than done. Like especially to find an audience that's you think there's market room for you, not just something that's oversaturated. I'm curious if there's a particular area you're trying to find opportunities in. Like, are you aiming for specifically those in-person experiences with like a Steam Deck, or is that just even though it's a personal ambition, you don't necessarily think that's where the market is going to lead you? Or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely think that building for Steam Deck. Okay, so let me back up. Kind of the constraints that I'm developing in are that I am a small developer by myself. I'm learning all these skills. I don't have the experience of industry and all these different things, the connections, right? I'm starting from scratch. And so I started with Steam as the platform that I'm like, hey, it's the lowest barrier to entry. There's a ton of people on here. It is highly competitive, but it's the most accessible to me, and I can just get started right away. Itch is kind of in there too, but I think the problem with Itch and similar sites is that you're just not going to get the level of players where you even have the chance to really grow into. And so while Itch is great for doing game jams and stuff like that, really you have, I think anybody would recognize that Steam is really where you want to be. So taking that as a constraint, then I'm looking at and saying, well, the Steam Deck exists and Steam wants to create all these different experiences. They have the Steam Machine, which has its own issues and challenges right now. But the direction that they're going is being able to make games for the Steam Deck and experiences that work on handheld, I think is enough to say that more people would be interested in playing it on the go. And especially as I think the PC gaming audience, there's gonna be more people who maybe won't have the chance to be able to sit at their computer and play all the time. Like they're gonna be on the road or with family or, whatever it might be. And they're like, hey, I just want to play a game for a little bit. I have 30 minutes to play and I want to play a game. I think that's where the handheld market comes in. Or with a younger generation, they might want to be out with their friends hanging out, and they were like, hey, why don't we, again, do the link cable thing, and is there a way that we could do like a LAN party locally? And so that would really be my dream of, could the Steam Deck be a mechanism, and maybe even the Steam Machine as well, for bringing back the LAN party? And I want to build my skills with that in mind, where I have a range of cooperative, competitive, whatever those experiences are, but really look at where the market is and just kind of like serve and say, hey, like, let's bring back the LAN party. Let's bring back these ideas where you can like take your progress and showcase it to your friends. And you still have the option of playing it online, but it might be an experience that's better enhanced when you're all in person together.
I can definitely see that working. It feels like there's always a risk when you're trying to do something somewhat cutting edge like that. Like, I mean, the Steam Deck is, I think one of the problems with the Steam Deck right now is that it's selling it like crazy, so not everyone can even get one that wants one. So it's like a little bit of a risky bet to aim for that audience specifically. But I think if you're able to pull it off, it would be a really unique and fun experience. One question I had that just came to my mind while you were talking earlier is, it sounded like you started out with some interest in art and some interest in engineering. Would you say there's areas that you're stronger in, like you're more of an artist or more of a programmer? And are there any areas where you feel like you like are entirely lacking and need someone else to like fill out the areas? Or are you pretty much an all-around sort of person?
Well, no, there's definitely areas where I'm like totally weak and I need to upskill in. So I'm definitely a programmer. If you give me a programming challenge, I will probably be able to solve it, or I would know what to like ask. I don't think that I'm like the greatest engineer ever, though. So I'm no interest in building my own game engine. I know that there's people who are like that. They love the nitty gritty details. I'm like, nope, not for me. So I'd probably be more of that like middle to top layer where I'm like kind of building on top of it. So that's where my foundation starts. Then I think I have a skill set with management and project management, really more so. And I'm kind of, that's where like the business side starts to fit in a little bit more. And then art is my weakest area, where I did not study art. I did not take any classes in school to learn the fundamentals. And so I'm having to make up for that, because it's something that I really enjoy doing. Like I love 3D modeling and like, I like looking at hand painted 3D art from like, World of Warcraft and stuff like that. And I would love to be able to do that. But I just know that there's a huge gap between what I would need to do that, as a viable commercial game and what I can do now. But that's not going to stop me from doing it. And then the one that kind of gets left behind is music. I did choir in middle school and high school. I did piano lessons and all that. I didn't really, do too well in it in particular. So I understand some of that theory. But I also know that like if I'm going to pick art as my main thing, I probably can't focus on music at this time, even though it's something that I also enjoy. But I'm like, that one is probably one where I know I would want to just look for other people who are really experienced, because I know like that can go a really long way. And then art is one where I also will need to partner, but I'd love someday to be able to also contribute that myself. So that's kind of like how I see my current like skill sets, but programming is like the anchor for all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're getting a lot of useful experiences in the business and marketing side as well, which should be very helpful. It's kind of the thing where even if you can do everything, like you don't have the time to. So
No.
like it sort of feels a little misguided to try to be a jack of all trades, because you don't have all the time in the world. But I'm curious where you would rank design in that, because I feel like you mostly talked about engineering, art, project management. But you didn't really mention design, like either overall game system design or level design. Like, where does that fall for you?
I would say maybe in the middle or on the lower side. Maybe I would say it's more in like the specifics of game design, where I've been playing games for so long that I think I have this sense of things that are good or things that are bad, or at least I have my taste for what I like or don't like. And then I follow a lot of game dev content. And so I learn these lessons from, different developers who are professional or indie, and just kind of hear what they say. Or I read a lot of books, mainly listen to audiobooks. And so there's some of those that come through where it's like, oh yeah, this is how we did this or did that. And so while I can understand the concepts, I don't know how good that my own original designs would be. And a lot of it would just be looking at something and saying, this game did this really well. Let me study that, break it down, and then try to apply that concept. So the other genre that I really enjoy is fighting games. And that is pretty much all like design, balance, and like the flow of creating tools for players to use. I also play a lot of Magic the Gathering and Commander. So like both of those games are like, you have so many pieces. It's very competitive. It's very like high design, I would say, rather than like narrative or like experience. And so because my mind is kind of wired for some of those things, like again, like it's there, but I don't necessarily know how I might arrive to some of those conclusions, but I can like see it for what it is. So I think if I get more practice, I'll eventually get there. But right now it's just kind of like latent like ideas in my mind that still need some more refinement.
I think design is one of those things that you learn best just by doing it. Like the more games you make, the better you'll get at it. Which kind of brings me back to Sunday Brunch Studios and just what your previous experience making games is like. So I know you've published one game on Steam. I don't know if you've made other games beyond that, but if you just want to catch us up on the games Connor has made so far.
Yeah, sure. So my first game, so the reason I made Sunday Brunch Studios was because along the way, after I started making games, I was like, okay, I want to be able to sell these. A friend had convinced me that, hey, if you're doing work, you should get paid for it. Like that is just a good way to make sure that you're protecting your craft. And if you want to do it for free, that is one thing you could do. That's a decision you could make. But also, if you really do get good at it, you should get comfortable with the idea that it might be worth something. And so I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it also at least gave me a like mindset of, I need to set a deadline. I need to like set these things, not necessarily set like a profit target, but really just if I take it more professionally and approach it with that mindset, it will be healthier for me in the long run because I will, just continue to upskill and think of myself in a way as a professional game designer, right? So I needed a company. I didn't want to sell games as myself. So I went through the whole process of making the LLC and things like that. And so that's how Sunday Brunch Studios was created. And so Puzzle Milk Tea, which is my game on Steam, that became the first game that I wanted to release. Somewhere in development, though, I was like, okay, I'm going to need to market this thing. So let me look at Chris Z's, class and see what's there. And the first thing he says is, don't make a match 3 game. And I was like, well, I've already failed this. So this one is just going to be, let's get it out on Steam and like, let me just release it to see what that whole process is like. So I was able to do Steam NextFest and stuff. But that's the only and first game that I've made where it went through the whole process more or less. But before that, I've done a handful of game jams. I did a Godot Wild Jam since I use Godot mostly. So I did a couple of those. I've done 2 of those this year even. And then I did the Ludum Dare one of the years with a bunch of friends. And so that was the first time where I worked in a team context to actually release something. And so most of the games that I've made so far and put are actually on itch.io. Sunday Brunch Studios on itch has more of those projects, but I see those more as like prototypes or ideas rather than like full-featured games. And that's really how I think most people would probably see it this way too, but itch is really for like the ideas, throw them out there, get things out, just share it for people, make it accessible. And Steam is more like, okay, these are the polished things, like the portfolio pieces, if you will. Right. And so I kind of maintain the same difference between the two, at least for now.
Okay. Yeah, it's curious you mentioned like your first team experience because you talked about games as a social experience. And to me, it feels natural that if you are invested in that as the kind of experience you want for your players, that you would also naturally be drawn as a designer to not wanting to work solo by yourself, because that's not a very social experience either. So have most of your projects been by choice, or just because you've had trouble finding people to do projects with? Or is your goal to be a solo indie developer, or do you want to really be a team guy at some point?
Yeah, no, my goal is to be someone who I see it as like a freelance, or in my mind, I kind of see it as like, like the fantasy stories where you're going through and it's like you have the party in the tavern who like assembles and like comes together, right? It's like, what would it be like for indie game dev to be more like that, where, people just kind of show up, them, you hear their stories, what they're doing, and you're like, oh, why don't we like tackle this thing together, right? And how could you spin up a party who could go on this mission, make a game, come back and be like, hey, that was great, and then you disband and then you find a new party, right? And over time, like, you're not constrained to making like one studio, because I think we see a lot of models where friends get together, they make a game and they kind of make a studio. I think Megacrit is exactly like that. We see Stock Pop Collective is another one where, they are kind of working together, but they, have a group and it's kind of set. And I want to take that one step in a different direction. I don't know if it's better or worse. It's in a different direction and say, what might that be to make it more temporary, where we accept the fact that collaboration can be hard, but that there might be more things that we could learn from other people, but make it so that the spinning up and disbanding of parties essentially is easier, and that there's a way to set that up so everybody could get, fairly recognized, compensated at everything, without having to deal with that overhead of like, well, what is the, government structure that we need to make and all these different things. It's like, how could you make that a lightweight process that promotes people, sharing knowledge and collaborating? So that way there's more opportunities for people to see that success. But the reality is, I think that if you were to imagine that tavern scene, the people who have been on harder missions and have done bigger things are naturally going to be the people who find more experiences because people want to work with them. And so at least for where I'm at right now, I know that I need to continue working on my games, cranking things out to show that I can do it, and just build my own confidence and skill that I could join a team and actually contribute, and know what I'm offering. So, certainly while I'd love to get to that point where that's a reality and there's like a path to that, it's also the fact that I think you either need to hone those skills by yourself, or you need to find people who are around your skill, figure out who those people are, and then try it together, and then just do a bunch of that before you're ready to take on the dragon, right? You can't just jump right there, otherwise it probably won't end well.
Yeah, I'm in a similar place of just, I would prefer to work with at least a few other people, but you kind of have to prove yourself before you can find someone who wants to take that plunge with you. Because even a relatively small game, I mean, a game jam is a little bit different, but even a relatively small game, if you're aiming for Steam release, is kind of a big commitment of time to ask if someone is not confident that you can deliver, not just in terms of like technical skills, but even just like sticking with the project and seeing it to completion. So
yeah. And I think that's one thing that, we might want to challenge an indie game. And when I say we, it's not like necessarily you and me, but just generally the community of, is there anything wrong with saying, well, let's just make a game for itch? Like, let's make it free. Let's do it as if it's a game jam, but, maybe we don't have to do a game jam. Like, what would be the game we want to make in a very small bite-sized thing? And let's just do it. And maybe we do it in 2 weeks and then we just see what happens. Because I think when we always say that Steam is like the end goal and we're always trying to make like shots on goal for that, we miss out on these other experience and other games that might allow us to test out the waters before we make that full commitment, or even to the point of validation that I was talking about earlier. We might be able to see that there's traction for a game idea first, and then make an informed decision after we have more data about how players are responding. Because certainly, if by week 2 that no one wants to play the game, I would imagine by year 2 that no one still wants to play the game unless you drastically change something, right?
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of studios. I mean, I can't come up with specific examples on the spot, but I've heard of a lot of studios that they started by doing a game jam together, and then after that went on to, as a studio, make a game that they published. And to me, you talked about like the games need validation, where you need to like put out a demo and see if it actually has traction before you know if it's worth seeing through to the end. But I think it's similar for teams. Like, if I was going to work with someone, I would want to do, like you're saying, a small itch release of them first, because the team needs validation too, not just the game,
Yeah, absolutely. And you also get you just get to have fun. Like, to me, that just sounds so much fun. And just like, there's low stakes. You just get to go wild with the ideas, explore, see what everybody's talents are, celebrate a job well done. And there's no pressure behind it, right? Hey, let's just do this. Let's just make a game and make it for ourselves.
Yeah, I think some people forget that game development should be fun. I mean, I say should be. I guess there's not necessarily anything wrong with people who want to take it as a very corporate job, but that's not for me, at least.
Yeah, same.
So we've talked a bit about community, but for people who don't know, we kind of both met in the same community in Blake's GameDev podcast Discord. And one of the things we wanted to do in this podcast was go over some of the games that people in that Discord community made and had demos in NextFest. So just like a quick NextFest review.
Yeah.
One of those games is mine, which is not why I suggested this. And actually, just some more funny context for viewers, that's kind of how we met as well, because I hadn't really talked to you before I posted my demo on that Discord, and you were actually my first playtester ever for Goblins for Good.
That's awesome.
Excuse Excuse me.
I didn't know I was the first. I was like, oh, okay, maybe you had other people playing it and stuff, but that's such an honor.
Yeah, no, you were the very first, and you went above and beyond. You recorded your gameplay and everything. And I think anyone who's in that Discord can attest that you're like a pillar of that community now. So,
Well, thank you.
but yeah, let's go over those games. I will open up. I'll try to have like edit in some footage of the Steam page or the trailer as we're talking about them. We can talk about Goblins for Good since you've already sort of reviewed the game and given me feedback on it. You probably won't have much to say, but I know that the version I put in NextFest was different than what you played the first time around. And also, you have a tendency to be very nice, which is not always what a game devs need to hear. So I guess what I'd like is your take on Goblins from Good. If you were trying to give me like a reality check of, hey, why this game, maybe you should give up on it. Maybe this is why it didn't do well in NextFest. Like just your more critical thoughts on it, not just your nice version of Connor that we got to see earlier.
Yeah, totally. So we'll be in the mindset of if I was investing in this game, what would I be saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So I remember. So I'll talk first about like the first time I played the playtest. I remember, and I have some notes down here so I could just kind of not forget anything. But it made me smile and laugh. And I remember, so when I playtest games, I really enjoy seeing what other devs are working on because it's inspirational for me, and it reminds me that I need to keep getting out there. And so as much as I'm doing this because I want to help others, it is also selfish for myself because I know that I'll be like, okay, now I'm more motivated because this person did this awesome thing and I'm really excited. And I kind of take that momentum and excitement that I get from playing other people's games and enjoying it to then taking that in my own games. And again, for your game, it was one like, oh, this is so cool. Like it feels like Warcraft 3, like the buildings, the strategy. And as I play through games, I try to look for that thing that makes it special. And for your game, it was definitely that feeling that it promised something of that strategy, but it was very straightforward, right? You don't have to like click and select units. You don't have to do all these crazy macros and like do all the hotkeys and stuff like that. It was just very much, you can place a unit. You don't even place a unit. It's like the unit drops. And the question is, where do you want to drop it? And then what upgrades do you want to buy? And there was something about that loop that I could see that vision you were, going for, even in an early form. So by the time that I got to the Steam NextFest, I remember big difference was...
Can I just pause for a little bit there? When you said that, it had you smiling and laughing, that's one of the reasons why, as developers, we oftentimes really prefer having video recording or being able to watch people play things, because what someone's doing with their face or the emotions they have oftentimes says a lot more than what they say. So I was busting on you for like being too nice, but really that was the thing I took away most from your recording was not anything you said about the game, but it was seeing that you were genuinely having fun and smiling with the game. And I think it's just helpful to know as a player that that's very helpful for a developer to be able to see someone playing. So if you're ever checking out demos, I encourage you to go as far as Connor did and record yourself playing and send it to the dev, because it's very helpful.
Yeah, totally. And it's fun because you get that practice of thinking through your thoughts and talking out loud. And it's surprisingly hard to play a video game and articulate your thoughts in a way that's constructive. So I think it's a good exercise for anybody to get through, especially if you're a game developer, because you'll get to know your thoughts much better too. And I remember the one that was getting me laughing the hardest when they were like sliding around everywhere, like on ice skates and stuff, which is not what you intended at all. But I was just enjoying it so much because it was just like so goofy. And I was like, this is just so much fun. Like, even if this gets fixed, like I can tell like what the idea is and how it's going. And it just made me like enjoy the project even that much more.
It remains to be seen if it will do well, but it was very encouraging to me that like, that was one of the buggiest builds you could imagine. There's like so many things wrong with it, and yet you still somehow managed to have fun with it. So
yeah.
Let's get to the criticism part.
Yeah. So that was the big difference, was getting into the tutorial, and I think that was a wise choice on your part to tutorialize the game. I can't remember if I had said it at the time, but I think I had suggested in that first play test of, hey, if there's a way to create the levels so that you kind of give players a way to like solve problems, it's like you put one problem in front of them, and you show them how to play the game through having them solve that problem. You not necessarily that you're doing no text tutorial, but you're really pulling the player into what you're asking them to do, because so much of playing a new game is them actually getting to the point where they, can make use of all the tools. Like if I didn't know that you could use a special power to do something, then it might as well not exist in the game. So it's kind of on the designer or game developer at that point to do that. And so that was, I think, one of the first things that I had said on the first playtest, which then you added, which was great because it was much smaller, there were fewer things going on, and it was much shorter as well to get from the start to the finish. But even on that one, I think I had given you the comments in the thread of it felt like it took a little bit too long, or that the completion was forced. Like I had to get to the end of that tech tree, and then that gave me enough stats to power through. And so the lesson that I was learning as a player, like if I was gonna like step away from my game design hat and just like go to player, what I was passively learning was, okay, this game, I have to build up the resources to, like the levels are designed in such a way that you must get to the end of the tech tree to beat the level, versus my ability to place in the correct area allows me to beat the level, right? Like those that was like the lesson through the tutorial that was taught. I don't know if I articulated it like that, but that was one of the things that stood out. And also it's that feeling, it kind of exists in YouTube Shorts too, but it's like the longer that something takes or the more friction that someone's runs into, the more likelihood that they're going to bounce off of it, because they're not seeing something different or new, or it feels like, oh, I can't beat this and there's nothing more for me to gain, therefore I'm just stuck, and then they quit, right?
I think this touches on something that, for me at least, was a criticism I had for some of the other games from the community as well, which is that a tutorial really isn't just to teach the player how to play the game. It's supposed to teach the player why your game is fun. So like I think almost the more important part of a tutorial actually is not to teach the player the game, because if it's fun, they'll want to play it until they understand it. The most important part of your tutorial is to sell players on the idea of why your game is fun. And I definitely think that was one of the areas where my demo fell short. Although I would make the distinction that that's why the demo fell short is not the same thing as why I didn't do well at NextFest, because not that many people play demos, but we'll get to that later, I think.
That's a much larger problem. But like assuming that someone landed onto your game and gave it a shot, those are the kinds of things where, across the board, it's something that I'm thinking about too. And I'm saying all these things, and these are all lessons that I'm still learning. But this is also why I play test so many games, because I can see how other people are solving these problems, and like kind of build up this mental repository of like, okay, as I'm going through it, I need to make sure that I'm screening my own work for this too, without having to go. And so again, in a way, it's like helping out the community, because these things are emerging, and then we can problem solve together, and then all of us start to upskill because we're all in that same space. As we were saying earlier, you're not by yourself in a silo just like making games, right? It's just like, oh no, there's like a whole community here. And I think why both of us really appreciate what Blake is doing and who he's kind of collected in this server.
That's a really good point that I also want to highlight is my process when I started Goblins for Good. The first thing I did was at the last NextFest, I tried to play as many demos as possible, like 30, 40, because like you said, absolutely, like seeing what other people are doing, right or wrong, the good and the bad, is a great way of figuring out what you should do. So I decided on Goblins for Good because I was seeing a lot of incremental games that I felt like were just following the formula and not introducing enough new things. And I felt like there was room for a game on Steam, even though the incremental genre is very crowded, there's room for a game on Steam that did something new, because there's a bit too many games doing the same thing. So I recommend anyone who wants to publish their first game on Steam, that a great first step is just trying a lot of demos. Even if NextFest isn't currently live, you can still find demos to play.
Yeah, totally. And I think like jumping back to your game for a little bit, there was only two other things that I think that stood out in my mind. And the first of which was, again, I think something that I saw happen for a lot of different demos was that I would ask myself the question every 10 minutes or so, am I doing the same thing that I was doing 10 minutes ago? And if the answer was yes, that was a problem to me, because it meant, especially in a demo when it's supposed to be a short play session, that there wasn't enough variety. And you are then, not you in particular, but the developers at those point are asking the player to sit through 10 minutes of whatever they might be doing. If we think about like classic RPGs like Final Fantasy and even Golden Sun, people hate the grind. When you get to that point, you hit a wall and you feel like all you have to do is fight enemies until you get to the level to beat, the next boss, and then you can get the next content. Like that is the slowest period of time And I think modern RPGs are like trying to solve that in different ways, but it exists in these demos too. And so it's like that pacing, which I think developers like Thorndy and Aramis are really cognizant of. That sometimes it's just hard to see until you get a person playing it, and maybe you're watching that footage. And again, this is where that recorded video is so important. Where if you were to just pick like a random timestamp and then jump ahead 5-10 minutes, if the player's doing the same thing, they don't have to say that, oh, I'm bored. You just kind of know, okay, there might be something where I have to introduce, or the pacing of it needs to be a little bit quicker. So that way, in this condensed period, as you were saying, convincing someone that the game is worth playing, that they want to return for the full length game too. Otherwise, they might come to the conclusion that, oh, okay, this game is just, filled with bloat, or it's like kind of not streamlined. And so if I want to play the whole thing, it's just going to be 2 hours of this. Do I want to do that? And they might say no. And then the last one is, I'm trying to look through my notes. For your game in particular, I remember that the graphics are so great. Like, I love looking at the graphics and everything. And it was like this imbalance of the level of polish with the sound effects and the transitions and stuff with the variety. Because what I was really wanting at the end of it was like, do I have spear goblins? Do I have slingshot goblins and all these different things? And like, it was almost a problem that I wanted more and it wasn't there. So it's good because now I'm more likely to be like, if you tell me that there's more stuff, I'm going to jump in right away. But it highlights that imbalance of how do you find that right level of content that the player feels satisfied in what they can choose from, what they're experiencing with. It looks like a game that is polished and well thought through. And so you were definitely nailing it on this one side, but now I'm longing for the other side. And I think the games that I would imagine did better kind of had a good level of both. And it's probably much higher than the average developer will think about. Because, we generally think of like NextFest as, oh, there's going to be a chance for people to play my game before it's the full release. But I think we need to accept as indie devs, myself included, that NextFest, the bar for that is much, much higher than it currently is. And so I think that was a common fallacy that it seemed like a lot of games going into NextFest, for this one in particular, were kind of falling into.
That's absolutely fair. And like both of those things, in some ways that criticism is encouraging to me, because those are both flaws that I already recognized and I would have placed as being the two biggest problems with the demo. And I do think I can solve both of them for the final release. It's funny you mentioned like having spear goblins and stuff. One of the things I actually initially planned for that first world that I just didn't get around to implementing was having more variety of goblins that you can switch to spawning. So that you're like,
I'm ready.
Everything you're asking for is exactly the kind of stuff I planned for the game. But before we get on to some of the other games from the GameDev community, I'm just curious for your thoughts from more of a marketing perspective, because you've mostly talked about problems with the demo, but like we touched on earlier, a lot of people don't play the demo. So what, from either the Steam page or even just like the product market fit of the game, like is there even an audience for this kind of game, or is sort of RTS and Incremental, are they sort of too opposed for each other to really make a good combination? Like, where's your thoughts in terms of why the game might not succeed apart from demo flaws?
Yeah. I'll answer the question first of, could Incremental and RTS, are they in conflict? Absolutely not. There's no way. RTSs are the original Incremental game, because what is a victory?
I don't mean in terms of conflict design-wise. I mean in terms of, in a marketing sense, like if RTS players see this and they think, oh, I won't like this because it's an Incremental game, and Incremental players look at this and say, oh, I don't like this because it's an RTS. Like, it doesn't matter if those gameplay elements actually work together design-wise, but marketing, does it create a conflict where there's not much of an audience that's going to see the game and think it's for them, regardless if it actually would be or not if they tried it?
No, and I still think no, because what popped in my mind as you were talking about it is speed chess, or bullet chess, I think they call it, right? Chess players love playing that game because it is so different and so streamlined from what they're used to that they have to play the game that they love in a different way. So as a game designer, the strategy is, how do you make this look as much like an RTS that they're familiar with, but make it clear that it is like bite-sized, instead of having to commit to a full 30-minute game where you don't even have a satisfying ending, where someone just forfeits and it's like, oh, okay, we accept that the game is over. How do you make it so that there is that end where you get to go through the full experience of starting from nothing, building up the resources, getting your units, going with the strategy, and taking down the enemy castle, right? Your game is PvE, so it's a little bit different, but imagine that, it could be PvP, or it is PvE and you're going through a campaign, and like that's what you get to do, like rapid going through as quick as you can. But then on the other side, think about the challenges that RTSs have of getting new players in. Is there's so many things you have to learn that it feels like it's not accessible. But when they see it in this bite-sized format, that they're going through the same things that they see from Day 9 or some of these other favorite players that they have. I forget who the Warcraft 3 one is, but they get to see that and go, oh, I could do that. That is something that I could do. And it's actually an entryway into an RTS genre where there might be players who maybe they know incrementals and they're like, oh, I could do that. And they're actually learning the RTS genre through your game. And now that's someone who might convert into playing something like StarCraft 2 or a different RTS that's going to be coming out in the market. But that's on you as a game designer to figure out how do you overlap those two ideas and make it both familiar and something different, but attracts both players. And it's much easier said than done, but I do think that incrementals is a really wise way to do that, because again, the tech tree is essentially just that. How do you make these choices of where you spend your resources and getting those iterations? It's just that the cost of that is not necessarily that you lose the game or that, you have to come up with all the strategies. Yeah. It's how do I do this in an efficient way? I don't know if any of that makes sense, but that's the vision that I see.
Yeah. No, there's a couple of things you said that made me smile. One of them is you talked about my game not being PvE, because funny story, it's inspired by a mod I made for StarCraft 2 that was PvE. It was a PvE, it was a PvP incremental RTS, just like Goblins for Good, except it was player versus player. It was a free-for-all called Zergling Clicker, and
whoa,
yeah, and you actually you would have to kill the other players to win. It was definitely head-on competitive sort of game, and that's what inspired Goblins for Good. So it actually has some roots in even more of a hardcore genre. But the other thing that made me smile is when you talked about it needs to be like recognizable as an RTS for RTS players, but also recognizable as an incremental game to incremental players, because that is like another thing that I have recognized as the biggest flaw with the game. So it's kind of interesting that we're both like, not only in the actual gameplay of the demo, but also in the marketing of the game, we kind of are aligned on what the problems of the game is that needs to be fixed. You seem to be very enthusiastic that there's an audience for this. How come you think it did very poorly in NextFest, if that's the case?
Yeah, the reason is likely that, I'm going to go on a hunch here and say that there was probably not the level of awareness for the game that it needed. And so the truth is that Steam, and I'm saying this is a truth, this is my takeaway and my feelings, is that Steam is not there to promote every single game equally. Their job is to promote the games that sell well. And part of it is when you release a game on Steam, they're handling the distribution and all of the, customer management. But as a result, if it costs, hosting your game more money for them and the support and the refunds and all these different things, that like they wouldn't want to promote that. And so it makes sense that we wouldn't have every single game get the same visibility all the time, because it would just be way, way, way too competitive. And so the mindset is everyone has to bring their own audience, or everyone has to do their own effort to bring that kind of initial audience and show that if you can market your game or your publisher can and bring an audience onto Steam or bring that direction there, that they will reward you then for more visibility because you're bringing more clicks. And so if they are spending their money investing into your game to bring it visibility when they could be showing any other game, that you are going to be the better return on an investment. And it is not fair, it is not even, but it does represent that some of these games that do and are able to sell or show well will get that traction. And again, I think with Steam Next Fest, we're kind of seeing that too, where the games that had a big streamer playing it, people just kind of directly went there. And it was almost to the point where it's like Steam Next Fest becomes an event where people know that there's going to be demos, but they're not going through like you and I are looking at, what's my feed and all this. They're just looking at, Steam Next is going on. What is Northern Line playing? What is all these other streamers playing? And I'm just gonna go play those games because they're kind of doing that curation for me, because the first 2 days are not curated, right? And so there's going to be those group of people, again, like you and me, who might be looking through and just like seeing, what looks interesting, let me go and try it. But I don't think that's going to be the average player who is on Steam. As much as we wish that were true, I think there's going to be part of it where all of us need to be thinking, how do I get the right people there? And so it might be the case that you just haven't found that audience yet, or a lot more marketing going into getting that awareness, building up the interest in your game. That's what's going to get you over that point where then you're going to get more of that like discoverability through the platform itself.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about all of that. But my encouragement to any other developers watching this is that's part of the reason why you hear a lot of people advising you to start with a small game, is because it helps a lot to learn those things by experience, not just hearing someone else say it. And part of the reason I participated in NextFest, even though I already knew some of the things you're saying about I just needed more marketing going into it, there's always this little voice in your head that's like, well, maybe my game is going to be the game that just has such a good demo that like it'll just organically blow up or something. And you kind of have to go through that process of putting your game in NextFest and seeing how it actually works out to help you internalize that lesson. So for your next game, you're going to do the marketing right because you know you have to. and so what I'd say is, like, if you've had a game that went to NextFest and didn't do well, rather than being discouraged by it, just take it as a lesson. And if you haven't gone into NextFest yet, my encouragement would be to start with a small game and do that before you work on your big project, because I think you need to be humbled and come back down to earth and learn what participating in NextFest is actually like and what it takes to succeed in it. And it's better to learn those lessons on a smaller game that you're not as invested in, and do that first.
Totally.
I think we should go on to some of the next games, but I just wanted to quickly say that you mentioned this as being like an I should clarify. You mentioned Goblins for Good as being a good onboarding for RTS games, and that was another thing that encouraged me, because that's actually my goal. My goal is to make RTS games, or at least RTS adjacent games. For people who haven't heard of it, there's a game called Mechabellum, which I always think as a turn-based RTS, which is kind of a confusing contradiction of terms, but there's a lot of ex-RTS players who like it because even though it's a turn-based auto battler, it shares a lot of DNA with RTS games, and something like that, which is either an RTS or RTS adjacent, is my goal. And so that's just another thing I'd like the listeners to take away is, if you are going to make a small game, you can make it a stepping stone to the game you do want to make. Like if you want to make an RTS, well, maybe an incremental RTS is a good place to start, because then you'll have players who at least have some interest in that genre, and so they'll maybe translate better to your next game. But also in terms of the skills you pick up making the game, whether technical skills or design skills, are going to be more transferable to your next project. So instead of being like discouraged that, oh, I have to do this small project I'm not as interested in, I would encourage you to think about the small project as a way of getting you amped up to make that bigger project and leading you as a stepping stone towards that bigger project. So that's all I have to say about Goblins for Good. If you have any final thoughts, you can share them. Otherwise, we can move on to the rest of the community's games from the Discord.
Yeah. I think just to tack on to what you said, that's where I think indies can really shine. Like AAA studios would never make like a game like that, because the return on investment for them would just not be worth it. The kinds of games that they're going to make need to have bigger budgets, have bigger payoffs and everything. And so they're going to want to do something that's more established, but indies can totally do that. And it's just because you're a fan of RTSs, you might be the perfect person to do that. And you understand and have that passion for what needs to happen. And it ends up creating a healthy ecosystem where all these games can coexist. And it's not like you're eating into any kind of, profit margins of a large corporation. They're going to come, take you down. It's just like, no, these games can just all exist together. And they all weave this fabric of a genre, of the RTS genre, and an RTS adjacent, right? And if you talk to people about Warcraft 3, how many people are going to talk about the campaigns, and how many people are going to talk about the custom maps and all those different things? And I think for a lot of people, it's those custom maps, Dota, the perfect example, that really stand out. And that wasn't anything that Blizzard had made. It was just something that the community, because they loved the genre and loved the engine that was there, that emerged from it. So again, I hope that even if your game, if you're in Steam Next Fest and it didn't do well, or you had a friend or saw these games that were struggling, you're seeing all these videos about personal calendar and whatnot, just know that the audience is out there, and that there's these things that you could do as an indie. The question is, are you going to stick around long enough to get those skills and to be your own messenger for the game that you're making, and just kind of get comfortable with that's just the ecosystem, and that's making games. Unfortunately, the getting rich part may not be attainable for everybody, but at least you can make games and have fun with it, and know that you're contributing to something a lot bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'll have time for it because we've already gone on for a while, but one of the things I wanted to talk about, if we have time, is finding your special advantage, because like you're saying, I think that's the goal as an indie is to find something that only you can do that bigger studios can't do, and it's not going to be budget or scope. It's going to be a special interest or skill you have, or just your style as a game developer that no one else has, and really leaning into that, I think, is the best way to be successful as an indie dev. And actually, I think that leads pretty well into our first game from the list, if you want to start talking about Bloodsworn.
In Blake's Discord, we had collected these lists, trying to just help each other out and say, hey, it was a little bit scuffed for this first one. We're still learning as a community, but we wanted to pull together everybody's games and say, hey, if you need playtesters, if you need feedback, let's get together and like help each other out, because this is our way of being able to support each other. And so Bloodsworn was one of the ones that actually was a multiplayer game, which was interesting. And then two, one of the ones that we got to play, we like scheduled a time and a couple of us hopped on and we experienced it. I had so much fun with this. And as soon as I sat down to play the game, and we were going through, we got to play with one of the developers, which was awesome. But I could definitely see it as a game where I could play with my friends. It would be easy. There was not that overhead of, I have to do my builds and all these different things and do dailies. It was just like, hey, let's go through and play something that feels like Borderlands and also feels like Doom at the same time, and just have some fun. And it's just like goofy and wacky and a little bit grotesque, but it's like fun. It's a game that I would love to see more of. Unfortunately, when we played at the time, there was a bug in there, so we couldn't get past the first level. But like immediately, I knew that it was one that would be fun, and I was very impressed with the level of fidelity on the graphics and how well it looked in engine without being superly realistic or technical. Like, it was just very, very effective and efficient in what it was doing. And so there were a lot of areas where I thought it did well. And one that I, again, just felt like I could see myself playing this with friends and it would be an easy time to pitch them on it. And that was just super clear from the demo.
Yeah. I thought it was a great transition from talking about unique advantage, because to me, the art style in this game is just very, very unique. You kind of pitched it as like Doom meets Borderlands. And now that you say that, I can see that. I think that's a great description of it. But when you look at it, it doesn't strike you as being derivative of either of those things. It feels like it's really its own thing. And I was really impressed by the art style of this game. I sort of felt like the capsule doesn't capture how creative the art of the gameplay is. So I think maybe that's something they could try to have the capsule have the same level of creativity as the game art does.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other part too is, as stuff like the Steam personal calendar and NextFest and all these things, the capsule is becoming more and more important. And it's not a way to get people, I guess it is a way to get people to click on your game. But again, it's that first signal that when someone sees it, they need to say, oh, this looks like these two ideas. Like, what needs to be in your game to get someone to understand that it is for them? And so one way you could do that is by looking at other games like Doom, like Borderlands, and see what kinds of icons and symbols are they putting in their capsule that you would want to make sure are represented. So for example, Slay the Spire, do they have cards? For a dice game, do they have dice? What are the different kinds of things that are there? And I think Bloodsworn is probably the same, of like, maybe it is capturing the audience, maybe it isn't. But if that's going to be the first pillar of what people see, would they at least know enough to hover over it to then see the trailer and the different previews and stuff? So I think their trailers actually did a really good job of that. But again, it requires you taking that time to stop on it.
Yeah, I think I can't give very specific feedback to the marketing of this game because I'm not really the target audience for it. It's not an aesthetic, even though I can recognize it as being really creative. I'm not the kind of guy who plays Doom or Diablo or anything. And I'm also like, for me, if I'm going to play an FPS, I want it to be story-based. So this idea of a multiplayer, like roguelike, isn't quite up my alley. But demo-wise, when we were talking about demos and how they need to teach the fun, I kind of had this game in the back of my mind because I felt like this is a really fun game, but the demo just didn't really teach you the fun of the game very effectively. At least that was my experience. I'm curious if yours is different or not.
Yeah, I mean, I was biased because I had the developer telling me what to do. So
that's not
I think I have no opinion because my experience was not going to be the average player.
And you were playing a multiplayer. So for me, my experience, just if the developer watches this, I was kind of thrown into the menu, but the menu is not traditional. It's like world space where you walk around. But I have no context for like what any of these things are. There's like so many complex UI things. I'm just like trying to figure out how to start the game, but because it's not a traditional game, there's not just a play button. So I'm wandering around the space, checking out all this stuff that means nothing to me because I don't understand the gameplay well enough to do it. It was like so difficult to just get into the game and start having fun. And like to me, that's a really bad problem to have for a demo in NextFest because you can lose people very fast if you're not immediately finding the fun. And I felt like that even once I did finally figure, it wasn't that hard to figure out how to get into the game. It's just, that little bit of friction can be enough. In my opinion, like, you should have settings and then play, and then you're right in the action for a NextFest demo. But even once I did play, I sort of felt like I understood that for a full game that this could be a good starting level. But for me, as a NextFest player trying out demos, I want the game to sell me on what's unique about this game that makes it fun. And I didn't really feel that jumping into the demo. It was like, I'm just shooting at some enemies. It's like, this is just a shooter. Like, where's the roguelike elements? I feel like you really need to show what's unique about your game that's fun in those first, I would say even first like 2 or 3 minutes. And so that would be my advice demo-wise for this game.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, we see popular games doing this. Like, if we were to look at AAA as like, what lessons can we learn? And maybe this isn't AAA, but Hades is a great example of this. The first time you hit start on that game, you actually drop into a run right away. You don't go to the main hub. You go into a run. You have your first boo, and it's already set as to what you're running. And that's a feature of their tutorial where you actually start on that. And it's something that you probably most players would overlook because they don't think about it. They're in the mindset of playing the game. But as like a game developer and a designer, that first time can be different than the second time you enter the game, and that's okay. Because then getting into a run becomes now first I teach them how to play the game, and then the second is I teach them how to start another run. And those are two different tutorials that you can look at. And as like a counterexample, fighting games run into this problem compared to something like League of Legends, where there's a giant play button in League of Legends, and you can start queuing into a match and get in a quick play, and you're already off on your way. Whereas in fighting games, you have to be like, okay, do I want to go to this mode and do this and select this character? And there's a ton of friction. And it's something that even in that genre, for like the professional games, that people see as a problem for the genre because of those steps. So again, all these lessons are things that we can learn from each other just through playing demos and things like that too, and just kind of thinking about that player experience.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want the developer to get the wrong impression. Sorry, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. But it's not like I think the physical space menu is bad. I'm not suggesting to scrap that for traditional buttons. It's just like you're saying, on a first run, like in Hades, you should drop into the game to start with. And like Hades, even when you are finally thrown back into that meta hub, in Hades, there's rooms that are just blocked off that don't show the first time you drop in. You need the same thing here. It's like when I get to that meta screen for the first time, it shouldn't show me every screen either. It should be teaching me, some of the first mechanics and then getting me back into the game again and slowly introducing more of them. So, but yeah, I think we can move on to the next game, Time to Waste by Tidepool Games.
If I were to describe this game in a nutshell, it would just be Wally, the Wally game. And I think it does really well, like showcasing that off. I think they mimicked one of the trailer styles from Dwarf Eats Mountain with the music and how it escalates. And so, originally, I'll be honest, that was a turnoff for me because I was like, oh, it's not original. However, I've been reading the book Inside the Box and learning about creativity and originality. And now I'm actually like, okay, if you were going to do something, better to do something that works, because there's going to be some percentage of players who have never seen Dwarf Eats Mountain. And if you know that's a successful recipe for a trailer style, adapt it for yourself and you have your game and what you're highlighting. So I thought that, I came around on that one, and that's even an example of, I may have opinions at the time that I experience a game or I'm going through or giving feedback to a developer, and my opinions change over time because I'm learning as well and I'm getting different perspective. So this one, for me at least, I thought that the biggest challenge with this game was I felt like I was kind of doing the same thing from minute 1 to minute 10, and the game was asking a lot of me to stick around and say, okay, but it's almost there. And by the time you see what's in the trailer and what you can do, I wanted to reach that a little bit quicker. So the idea was cool. How you were going through was neat, and I thought that it was a polished experience. It looked really good. But my experience with that one definitely was, I just kind of wanted to get to the end a little bit faster to see like where's the dev taking me? What are the ideas? And I think that they had already seen some success on some other channels too. So to me, it was just like kind of get that experience down because the appeal was already there and had shown that experience of like, yeah, this could get people in.
Yeah, I think for me, this one, I think they could have a successful game here, but for me, the demo kind of combined the problems from the two games we've already talked about, Goblins for Good and what is it called? Bloodsworn.
Bloodsworn, yeah.
Because I felt like one of the issues with Goblins for Good was that it was too slow, and this was even slower, and it was like almost
Yeah.
painfully slow, to the point where I found out that early on in the game, when you're harvesting, he's so slow and it takes so long for him to turn to do the next one that you can actually progress faster by, as soon as you collect the first resource, exiting the level and restarting it. So like the fastest way to play this game was to quit every level as fast as you could. And like I actually started to enjoy it more once I found this hack, because I could progress a little faster just by clicking my first resource, quitting, restarting, and I could progress a little faster. Even so, it was kind of slow. The progress was a little faster, but it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't meaningful progress. It wasn't causing me to do different things. And that's where I'd get back to the same issue of Blood. Why do I keep forgetting the title?
Bloodsworn.
Bloodsworn is it keeps tripping up because I keep thinking Bloodborne.
Bloodborne. Yeah. You're just like,
Bloodsworn.
get over that.
Yeah, but it's the same issue where there's probably unique mechanics here, but the beginning moments of the game didn't show you those unique mechanics. So like I'm slowly grinding through this game, and it's like so far this is like every incremental ever. It hasn't shown enough different to convince me it's worth the very slow grind. I think especially for a demo, but even the final game, the beginning moments should be a little faster. But on top of that, you need to prioritize showing a unique mechanic very early on, so players can be sold on your vision, because it doesn't matter if you have a great game, if you can't show players that soon enough, they're gonna churn. So
yeah. Well, and you brought up a good point with the what you found. I love doing that as a playtester, of not doing what the developer intended for and giving them that feedback too, of saying, hey, I found that this was a fun way to play the game, and I don't think this is what you intended, because I think I hope that it gives developers a chance to decide what they want to do with that information. Because they could say, okay, how do I lean into that? And I wasn't expecting that, but that's good to know. And how do I lean into that and let players do that? Or, okay, I need to like consider how, like, what does this say about the game design that I currently have, and what other things might I need to change to disincentivize that? It's not on the list, but I played Orb Breaker as well, which was Aramis's game, Aramis and Thornity's game, one of the 3 that they had. And I felt the same thing, where I was like, oh, I kind of just want to end the run immediately and collect my resources and go back to the loop, which is at this odds of their whole game actually was you wanted to survive to the end of the round. But then there was this problem where if I survived to the end of the round, then all these resources that I couldn't collect, like I had these weird tensions where I wasn't growing. And it was kind of the same thing where I gave them the similar feedback of like, make it so that if I do last to the end of the round, that I get rewarded for that, because I'm going to want to do that. Like if it just like gets all the resources that I got on the map, I'm going to want to like make that choice of, is it faster for me to like target that one thing that I need and reset? Or do I need to try to live and not like take out some of these enemies so that I have the greatest chance of getting all the resources on screen? And then suddenly that becomes an interesting decision, rather than it feeling more binary of like, oh, this is just the optimal way to play. Like just those 2 choices are much more interesting and make it feel like the experience of going through those 10 minutes is different enough, because I'm flip-flopping between different choices rather than just like, okay, I'm waiting for the next upgrade.
yeah, but I don't want the developer of that game to get too discouraged, because I do think they can make a very fun game from it. It's just it's funny, like the smallest things, just the pacing, the first few minutes of your game can matter so much, and that can be discouraging if you've gone through NextFest and had something just wrong. But on the other hand, it should be encouraging for you to know that your game is only a small tweak away from being really fun. It's like, that's the more positive way of looking at it, is like you have this relatively low-hanging fruit that once you fix it, your game is going to be a lot funner. So
yeah, and I think on all these threads, or a lot of them, we had really great discussions. Like every single one, when we were giving these feedback in the moment, I think we had good back and forth, and again, the advantage of being part of a community where you can hear this from other developers or people who maybe they're not discovering your game, but you can at least get them in front to get some different perspectives. And so that was really appreciative too, I think, from everybody involved, where we felt like we could just speak our mind and just debate, discuss, and understand like, hey, what was your design for this? So yeah, I think it was all good vibes in the channel, at least, or in the server.
Yeah. I wish I had more time to participate, but with my own demo in it, I was just in constant, putting out fires mode, and I hadn't had time to really.
You'll get your chance next Steam Next Fest when you don't have a game in there.
Or unless I do. Probably not, but yeah, we can move on to the next game. I don't know if you played much of Ascension.
So it's Ascension, the Infinite Descent. And this was actually one that I think I had spent the most time talking to the developer on. And I think they were really trying. This was one of their first games. They were trying to get something out, and what we were talking about in the beginning of, hey, you just got to get your first game out there. And I think it was a very good experience for them to explore. And I was probably the hardest one. I was the most critical on this game of all of them, truthfully. But it was because I could see that this developer was passionate and wanted to do something good. But there were a lot of red flags that were very, very clear just from playing the demo. But this game is I guess it's more like a rogue-like. I think I always get confused, but it's actually similar to Rogue, where you're going through the dungeon, fighting these enemies. You can build out your kit, and you're building up this character. One of the coolest things is that as you put stats into certain points, your character model changes to fit a class that kind of shows on screen. And so there was a lot of really interesting ideas here. The enemies, you would get into these fights and you could play different abilities, and they had a mana system that was more similar to the Digimon trading card game, where once you went below a certain point, it triggered the enemy's turn, and then you regened points up to where you could take actions again. And so there was a lot of interesting decision points, but all of it summed up where it was lacking, I think, that focus and that direction. And I think the art style really hindered it quite a bit too, where it felt very generic and thrown together, which is something that, again, could easily be fixed, could easily be refined. And I really think of this as a game that felt more close to something that I would see in a very well done game jam game, but not quite at the point where it's ready to be on Steam and all those things. The ideas were very clearly there. It just needed a little bit more time to cook and get through that refinement, rather than using its one shot in Steam Next Fest on this iteration of it.
Yeah. And that's definitely something I learned with Goblins for Good too, is you really need to get more rounds of iteration and feedback with an audience before you participate in Next Fest. It should not be, it wasn't my first time getting feedback, but it should be a priority to get several rounds of feedback from not just a few individuals, but several groups before you participate in Next Fest, if you want to, min-max your usage of it. I don't think there's a problem with someone who's not super serious just jumping into Next Fest, but if you were expecting more from it, you need to put more into it. So
Totally.
I think for me, this game was a bit obscure if you're not someone who's played the source material. We talked about tutorial issues before, but this one felt like not only... So in my experience, a good game should not really have too much of a structured tutorial. The game itself should just be so easy to understand that you pick it up as you play. This game felt like not only did it not have a tutorial, but it was extremely obscure to try to figure out the game just by playing it. The UI UX on this was not very good. There's one time it was trying to highlight me to do something, and it took me forever to notice because it was just too subtle. Just issues like that. So I can't honestly tell this developer if the game is fun or not, because I could never understand it well enough to play it. And I think that's probably the experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, and there in Blake's Discord, we had Thornity do a little talk, and he talked about fantasy, friction, and fun. And really that's speaking to the friction part of it, where you can't get to the fun if you're just not understanding what's going on and getting confused. And again, through the book I've been reading, Inside the Box, they kind of highlighted at Pixar how they would show films and get people to talk about, in their brain trust is what they called them, areas where they were confused, and they were not allowed to give solutions to it. And I think this is the exact case where when you're getting those feedback, don't ask developers. You have to tell them, don't give me solutions, just tell me where you're confused, because you have to go through those rounds to say, okay, I need to polish it out. And until you get to the point when someone you knew plays it and says, oh yeah, I understood the whole thing, and you see them go through it, that's when you know that you have something that works. And oftentimes, because you're the developer working on a game, you won't see those things. So you have to rely on other people to give you that feedback, and you have to do multiple rounds to keep smoothing it out. And you can't reuse there's so many ways that makes it hard. But again, the benefits of being in a community like this, where you might be getting fresh eyes on it every single time, and you can sequence it in such a way that you can get to the point where the game isn't confusing and your onboarding experience just makes sense.
I don't remember who said it or what the quote was exactly, but it was something to the extent that, a large majority of game design is not the rules of the game. It's making sure the players understand the rules of the game, that is clear to them. And I think I don't want the developer of this game to get discouraged that, they can't make a fun game, or that there isn't an audience who enjoys the game they made, because I don't think that's the right lesson. I think the lesson is just that you still have work to do in terms of conveying understanding of the game's rules and mechanics to players. And this is something I've had to learn the hard way making games as well. before we had this podcast, we were talking off screen, and one of the things I was mentioning is my experience making a level for Blizzard's modding contest for StarCraft 2. And the level I made is called Cradle of Death. And one of the core mechanics of the game is you're delivering nuclear payloads. And I had some fun ideas about how you're using this to destroy the enemy, but it can do friendly fire, and what kind of tension can we explain there. But there's a huge risk, because if a player loses all of their army to their own nuclear bomb, it's a very negative experience. So I don't think this is an exaggeration. I spent maybe 25% of my time developing the level and the mechanics, and 75% of my time just trying to polish the UI and UX of the experience to make it extremely clear to players. And I think that's part of the reason why I ended up doing so well, is just because a game that both has interesting ideas but also conveys them very clearly is going to do a lot better than a game that maybe is even more fun but just doesn't teach the mechanics well to a player. So
Yep. And I'd also liken this game to the series Cerulean. This was a game that I played because it reminded me of Dragon Warrior Monsters on the Game Boy Color. And I love that series. And you could, if you go from Cerulean, the original, to Cerulean Ultimate, which is the recent, you can go on Gamalytic, look at how the sales did. It's very clear that it took the developer that many iterations over however many years to get to the point when they could have I think the first one was like under 100,000, and the last one was like getting close to 1 million, if not over, in revenue. And it, like, that's just what it takes. And for some of these games that are more mechanics heavy, more systems heavy, you're not going to get it right. And so you're perfectly right on that, Justin, where it's like, you need to understand your game well enough, and don't take away the lesson that no one wants it. It's that the level of polish needed to get there just needs a lot more iterations on it, so that the audience can understand that there is something here. But your core audience is going to be there day one, because they love these types of games and they're super mechanically depth. It just won't appeal to a wider audience until you can get over some of those onboarding challenges.
And, it might sound like we're making it simple to say, it just needs to be easy to understand, but I'm not at all trying to imply that. It's like, it's not an easy problem at all. It's like, even for a game very simple, like, I think you could even talk to, like, Aramis about a game about feeding a black hole, and, like, he could probably tell you all sorts of stories about avoiding having a tutorial in the game, but still letting players understand it, is not necessarily trivial, even for a game that simple. So if you're trying to make a very complicated game with a lot of mechanical depth, like, it's going to be even harder. And just to loop back to, like, sometimes people listen to advice from YouTubers and they don't necessarily understand all the reasons behind it. And I think this is just another example of why so many people will tell you to start with small games, because you really need to get your reps in learning this skill of making your game's mechanics understandable to players, and making it fast to find the fun of your game's unique mechanics very early on. So yeah, for that developer, I would just encourage them to keep making small games and working on specifically that UI UX, how easy is it to understand aspect of their skills, and I'm sure they'll do a lot better very quickly with that kind of focus and practice.
Totally.
So actually, for our next game, I want you to tell me a little bit of a story how you know these developers, because I think you created the thread for this game, even though you're not a developer, because you know these guys. So what's the story behind that? This
is my friend David. He made this game, and we actually used to be coworkers before he left the company we were at. And he went on to do a bunch of stuff and ended up making his own game, which is really cool. And I reconnected with him, and as I started getting involved in this Discord, I was like, hey, you're in NextFest, like, why don't you join this? And just start getting connected to the community. And so he was okay with me posting his game. He joined later, but I wanted to make sure he got in before the roundup was happening. But this is a tower defense game, much like games from Warcraft 3, all those different mods. And it is much in the style of Wintermall. And I don't know if Wintermall was the original one that did it, where the difference is that in something like Bloons, you have a path where you can't build on top of, and the creeps go through the level and you have to build around it. Where the Wintermall style of tower defenses, you actually build the maze that the creeps have to run through. And so it was much more like that, which I personally like those games better.
We usually called them mazing tower defenses for that reason.
Okay, amazing tower defenses. It's just going to be Winter Mall for me. I'll try my best to remember the official name.
But it's like a pun, like amazing. It's an amazing tower defense.
Okay, that'll stick. That'll stick. All right, I see what you did there. But yeah, like, and the big difference was that this was more like a roguelite. I think similar to Ember Ward was one that had come out while this game was in development. But instead of the pieces, it's really just focused on the towers, the upgrades, the different abilities, and then they have a bunch of characters that come along, much like Hades, and have different boons and stuff like that too. The other big one is that it's co-op. And so that was something a little bit different than maybe other tower defenses in the genre. And so I played this one. I didn't actually play the Steam NextFest demo. I played an earlier version of the demo, but I think from what I saw from the feedback, there were a lot of similar comments about what areas were kind of lacking, which was really, again, the tutorial, big surprise, where people felt like it was either too slow, too linear, that there was too much text, all these different things. And it was something that I think David actually continued to say, yeah, we recognize this as a challenge. But then on the other side, he was seeing people who played the demo for like hours and hours and hours. So there's this clear difference of the people who it really resonated with, very similar to Ascension, just resonated with them and they wanted to continue playing the game. They had the content to back it up, and even more, I think, when the full game comes out. But for the players who maybe weren't used to this or weren't sure what to expect, that's where they ran into problems, because the onboarding experience was just kind of like having some friction. Or even players who play a lot of tower defenses of any style, they were like, oh, it doesn't work in the way that I'm familiar with. And so again, those are just design questions of like, how do you walk a player through this, or how do you emphasize the parts that are doing well for the right audience, and how do you de-emphasize or change the things that maybe are a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely that was my experience. Like, I'm not a huge tower defense guy, but I used to work full time on one with a studio, and I've played a bunch of Warcraft 3 ones, so I'm not completely new to tower defense genre. And I was having a little trouble with the tutorial, and I think part of that comes back to what we said earlier, which is the difference between a tutorial and how intuitive a game is apart from its tutorial. And I think this game lacked a little bit in that area, where even after the tutorial taught me a mechanic, I would still sometimes struggle with it just because the UI UX was not very clear. There's some readability issues, I think, with even just the gameplay graphics. Like, I couldn't always tell when tiles were highlighted when it was supposed to be showing me where I can or can't play something, and it was sometimes hard to see that. But I also think it struggled in the showing your unique gameplay, because I was playing this tutorial and like, this is just another tower defense, like, and then I go to see the Steam page later and see it's roguelike. I'm like, I would have never guessed from the tutorial I was playing that those mechanics existed in it. So I think there's definitely an extent where the tutorial in a teaching aspect needs improvement, but I think honestly what more needed improvement was the base intuitiveness of the game and showing the fun, because I could have gone through a bad or slow tutorial if I had understood more of the fun that was promised to me as a player if I got through it, which I didn't, but I can tell that it's a very cool game, so I'll definitely give it another chance later.
Yeah, well, and I think there was another challenge that even for the people who did get into it, there was a promise where it's an amazing tower defense, but because when you set up those mazes, you want to give more time for the player to actually have that feeling of, you get to build up towards something, you get to survive, and then you hit the peak where it's like, oh, look at this maze, like, I'm invincible, nothing can stop me, and you want to like push it to the end. But because it's a roguelite, the levels are pretty short, and so it's like this weird tension where, how do you get up to the point when you can start doing that maze, but also have enough enemies where it's like you can't just like put all your towers at the spawning points and then just kind of brute force it. And so that is a very interesting design space that they're in, where I think they're still working through some of that. But players were discovering that, or feeling that, where it's like this promise of something that's going to be, you get to do like, these big mazes, but the level ends before you even get to the point where like, oh, it's already over. And that can be a challenge too, where players actually want it to take longer because they want to play with the engine that they've created on a given level.
I don't want to be too harsh, but I think like another thing that put me off from the game a little bit is I found the art style of the characters in the game to clash a lot. Like, I think you could have gone with either of those styles, but they don't really fit at all. I would have preferred the character portraits to also be pixel art. But also the story for me, it felt like it was trying too hard and wasn't landing. So it was almost detracting from experience. The quippy dialogue was, it almost detracted from the experience more than added to it. But I think like all of this is part of a tutorial issue, because it's possible, like, if you just let the story breathe, that it's fine, but trying to cram too much of it in the beginning. I found in general, for like any demo I played to NextFest, even if I want a story game, I don't really want to focus on the story during the demo, because I don't want to spoil the story from when I actually play the game. So
Right.
I usually want even story-based demos to focus more on the game than the story. And also, it's just like, you kind of have to earn investment in story. Like, it's very hard to get any player, even if your story is good, to care about it from minute one. You kind of have to get players invested in your game first, and then introduce more and more dialogue. At least that's been my experience.
Yep. And I think to go along with that, well, first off, I don't really care much about stories in games. There's maybe a handful where I stopped to like pay attention to it. Oddly enough, Kingdom Hearts is one of those, but other games I'm like, I'm not too bought in. So for me, it wasn't a problem because I just skip over it. I'm not even reading it. So I'm just like, okay, text box, blah, 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 blah. Let me get back to the game. So it is interesting because it sounds like you maybe are more, for some games, interested in the narrative. Like that's kind of like more sometimes what you're there. I'm like almost never. Like it's very rare that I sit through any of the cutscenes anymore because I'm like, I just want to get to the gameplay. Like get me back there.
It's funny you say that, because I wasn't actually trying to pay attention to the story. It felt like to me the story and the tutorial were very intermixed. And I think part of the trouble is I would sometimes try to skip the dialogue and end up skipping tutorial. And also, like, the text wasn't consistent where it would display. So that kind of added to the UX confusion, where it's like there's text appearing in different parts of the screen. I can't tell if it's tutorial or dialogue, and it's like it was easy to accidentally skip parts of the tutorial in an effort to skip dialogue, which I don't think is really the experience you want. I think if you look at a lot of story-based games, they don't start with a huge dialogue dump during the tutorial. Like, using Hades as an example, there's so much dialogue and story in that game, but you don't just get hammered with line after line when you jump into your first run. Like, you jump into the gameplay and you're eased into the story after you're invested in the game, which I think would be a better route for Shrouded Siege as well.
Totally.
But I'm glad to hear that players who did stick with this demo really enjoyed it. Hopefully, if he can polish up some of the introductory elements, he'll have a winner on hand, because I know tower defense games do pretty well on Steam.
Yeah, definitely. Now, as we hop into the next games, I'll be honest, I didn't actually play any of these 3 games, and there is a reason for that, which is relevant, is that these games came in kind of late, a little bit tacked on. And this would be a caution, I think, to other indie developers who are looking for playtesters and looking for ways to get visibility onto your game, is engage with the community. If you jump in, be a community member. Don't just, put your demo and then, kind of check out and then come back later and look at like an inbox of like, oh, are the comments collecting? For me, the reason why I made time for the games above was because those people were there. They made an effort to respond, to chat. We had good dialogue, and they were very active. And so while I go and when I'm not busy, I try to like play test all these different games. I also look out and see like, hey, who are the people who are just having conversations and chatting, and let me engage with those people, because it's a give and take. And so I have nothing, here nor there for some of these other games. It just happened to be the case that I was busy, time constraint, and when I have to make that choice, I'm going to give it to the people who I know are like kind of active community members, because I feel like I want to support them. And so, at least for me, I'll be honest, I didn't play these remaining games. I don't know if you had a chance to, but again, just would encourage indie developers to think about that, is your journey in being part of this indie development scene is to others, and show up for the long run, not just for the moments when you need something from someone else, because it can make that difference.
Yeah. Anytime I go to any community, whether it's Reddit or Discord or anything, if I'm going to post something that I've made to get feedback, I always make sure I go and give feedback on at least twice as many other people's things. Like, if I want feedback once, I'll give feedback on 2 other projects, at least, if not more. And I think that's just a good rule to have. I didn't really pay attention to that aspect, because I don't mind trying out demos, even if they weren't in the Discord at all. Like, trying out a lot of different NextFest demos is a good experience for me. If you haven't played the next couple of demos, maybe you can just give your thoughts in terms of looking at the store page from a marketing perspective, which I think is a good transition to Goat's Odyssey, because it's a point-and-click adventure game. I think if you read Chris's blog, he would recommend that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's an audience there, but it's in particular they're challenging games to make, and I think if you were going to make one, you would have to make sure that it's in the style of like Secret of Monkey Island or some of those other more popular ones from LucasArts, or look at more modern ones and like see what they've done, because there's some interesting takes, and I actually I feel like there was a more recent point-click adventure game that Northern Line had played, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, but yeah, definitely needs to be something very creative and different. And I think the biggest one was actually for this one, and when I was seeing in the comments, was more the issue of things being unclear or missing sound effects. So it's like, again, that level where there's a lot of polish, but some of the areas are missing, and those things stand out because they're missing, not necessarily because it's bad. And so there's almost a thing, I guess, maybe as too much polish, where you have to make sure that it's an even experience. That way players can kind of set their expectations accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I grew up with a lot of point-and-click adventure games. Obviously, The Secret of Monkey Island, the whole series, but especially The Curse of Monkey Island. And a lot of their kids' point-and-click adventure games. I don't know if you've heard of Putt Putt, Freddy Fish, Spy Fox, all those. But I think even if you look at like modern point-and-click adventure games, like Telltale series of games, they've kind of restarted the studio again. A lot of them are very heavily story-based. Having a point-and-click adventure game with no dialogue at all, I think, is going to be a hard sell unless you make it really one of those hardcore detective games, like Return of the Obra Dinn. But then it's almost an entirely different genre, so you're kind of looking at something completely different. I think that the pros for this game is I did think it was a very creative style in a good way. Like maybe not quite as eye-catching as Bloodsworn, but it's still definitely the kind of thing where it had a unique look that to me was endearing. But yeah, the main issue was definitely, like you're saying, just the usability issues, the UX things just being unclear, and it being difficult to get feedback on your actions to figure out how to make progress in the puzzles. It was just missing.
Yep.
Kind of speed round these since you didn't play them much, and we're also, I think, a little short on time. But Down Under Destruction.
This one was interesting because it's a game coming out of a group where from the same like, so there's a set of developers who are all working on similar games together, or not together, but like as their own like accountability group. And this is one of the developers who's kind of in that group, which is with Bloodsworn, as well as Lark, which is a game that we play tested as a community at one of the other events that we had within Blake's Discord. And so it's really interesting because I believe they all use Unreal. And just looking at the store page, it looks like it's using Cinti assets as well. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it just reminded me of that style, that kind of like low poly 3D style. And so, this looks like a game where, you go in, maybe a friend swap-ish style of game, and you check it out. But immediately, it's not clear from the thumbnail to me, at least. That's what I would be looking at, of like what this game actually is and what you're asking the player to do. So, it kind of like checks some of the boxes, but I probably would need to play the game or see someone else playing it to really understand, like, how do the bricks relate to stuff and what are you asking me quite to do?
Yeah. Boy, this game was interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So you checked this one out?
Yeah, I did. It had some of the same issues of Bloodsworn of, not the best starting UI UX to get you into the game and figure out what's fun about it. Something I'd meant to mention about Bloodsworn that I didn't get around to is a little bit of a conflict in theme that didn't really make sense to me, where in Doom, you're the Doomslayer guy going around killing demons, and in Diablo, like, you're trying to kill Diablo and you're like a priest or paladin or something. Bloodsworn, it was very confusing to me that you're like fighting these cultists, but the things you're doing are almost as messed up, and like there's just a little bit of thematic confusion there, where it's like it makes more sense to have good guys and bad guys rather than it just seems like everybody in that game is a cultist. Maybe that wasn't the intention store lore wise, but thematically that's how it came across. It's like you're not the Doom guy or a paladin defeating evil, you're just everybody's evil, and I think it makes it harder to connect to thematically. And this game had a very similar issue where it's like I can totally get down with like Aussie humor if I'm like fighting kangaroos and like I don't know specifically, this one's like construction themed, I don't know the culture of construction on Australia, but I was totally down for that. But then you get into it and there's like this alien obelisk possessing people, and you're like, wait, this isn't an Australian humor game. This is like an alien possession game. And like to me, the clash there, it just made it a lot harder to buy in, because I would be down for either of those themes, but it felt like the game couldn't decide what it was. It couldn't decide if it was a funny Australian humor game or if it was what turned out to be more of a mechanical focused, it almost, gameplay wise, it was almost very similar to Bloodsworn. It's like another first person action type of game. And it just, yeah, it felt a little bit too all over the place, not really very focused on what it was trying to do, and some similar onboarding issues with not really showing the fun fast enough. But that was my experience with it.
Yeah, and this is a disclaimer that I try to give whenever I playtest other people's games too. Again, maybe this is or isn't your maybe this is a game that you are a target player in, but I'll try to send people my my Steam replay. So it's much like Spotify Wrapped. I think that's the more popular one, but Steam has a similar thing with the games that you've played, and I'll send that to people as like, here's my player profile. So that way, if there's something that I'm in a specific demographic with a player profile, at least people have that context. Because when you're asking other developers for feedback, or like when you're looking at people who just kind of play games across the board, there's a difference between what the player who your game will appeal to will think in that profile versus someone who kind of bypasses all that because they're just like, oh, I'm going to play this game because it's made by another indie developer. I'm curious what they're doing, right? Yeah. And so when you're a developer in this situation where you're like trying to make sense of all this different feedback, sometimes you have to like filter through and be like, which ones are the ones that I need to like be aware of and be like, yes, this is valid, and I need to take that in as signal, versus what are the things that are noise, which is still valuable, still helpful for me to know, but I need to weight a little bit differently than the ones that's like, oh yeah, this is very clearly in line with what I'm hearing, and in alignment with, okay, I might not agree with it, but if everybody's saying it, it must be a problem, right? And knowing that difference is very, very, very difficult, but also helpful when you are a developer playing other games too. You just kind of let other people know, like, hey, here's where I'm at, and here's my perspective, and again, you can make with it of you will, but also where I think I'd mentioned earlier, give problem areas where you're confused or where you're not understanding, not solutions of how to fix it, which I think you did perfectly there, right? You said, I'm down for either of these two things, I'm just confused on what it is. You're not telling them which one to go, you're just saying, this is just how I'm feeling, right? And I think that's a perfect way to articulate, some of that feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I try to like tailor my feedback based on how much I feel like the game is targeted towards me. If it's not a genre I like, I try to stay away from my opinions on how fun it was and focus more on like UI, UX issues, like how easy is it to understand. And like one of my big issues with this game is the lobby select, like the level select lobby. I had to hunt around for like 5 minutes to find the right level to start, because I kept accidentally going to one that was like too high levels. Like, oh, this is level 3, this is level 2. And it took me forever to find level 1 because just the level design of the lobby room did not funnel you in the right direction very clearly. And it's like that kind of thing is like, I don't have to be someone who enjoys this genre of game to necessarily be able to point that out. Gameplay wise, my impression was that there's definitely some fun there. It wasn't very fleshed out. I think the impression I got was this was someone who's still treating NextFest as a way to like get feedback in the first version of your game, whereas a lot of devs are treating NextFest as this is how to sell my game, and I'm showing just a slice of the polished final result. It didn't feel like this was doing that, so I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't do well in NextFest for that reason, but maybe the developer's okay with that.
Yeah. One thing is, I'm looking at the store pages, I'm noticing that there's in the top right corner a thing that says dud, and that immediately to me screams Devil May Cry and the super stylish system, where there's a conflict, because when I see that, I'm in the context of this is used in a style of spectacle fighter genre, but the camera perspective is a first-person game where I'm not really sure what's going on. And so as a player, if I like spectacle fighters and I like combo-based games like that, it might be very cool, but this looks like it's novel. I can't remember if we had mentioned it earlier, but that would be a case where if you're doing something novel and something familiar, you have to make sure that it's has enough familiarity in there that this new camera angle is easy for someone who likes the other genre, which is that spectacle fighter, to understand, or if someone who has no idea what spectacle fighters are, that there's ways for them to understand how the combo system works and like explaining that. So again, just even from looking at the store page, it shows the power of those kinds of things that you choose to put in your thumbnails or what you're putting on your UI, or even the systems that you're deciding to put in. It speaks different languages without anyone having, like, I did not play this game, but I see that and I immediately know what that means, and it's significant.
Yeah, and it's not always necessarily the case that you can't have that element in your game, but just maybe it shouldn't
Right.
be in your store page.
Yep. Or you put it in there, and you have to make sure you can back it up too.
Yeah.
Don't just like throw it in for the sake of putting it there.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just meant to be humorous, you know, reference to something else in the games industry and not a serious reference, that can be okay. But humor is a difficult thing to sell, especially in a store page. Like, you kind of have to experience that to get it. And I didn't pick up on that reference, so I don't know exactly what they're going for with that. But I think in general,
Yeah.
part of what you're picking up on is, like I said, it was kind of unfocused.
Mm-hmm. Or at least for me, that would be curious. I'd be like, oh, I might try that demo because I see it and I'm like, oh, is this a spectacle fighter? Because I'm curious if this is like Devil May
Yeah.
Cry. So it kind of goes both ways, but I would definitely be more disappointed if it was not what I thought it would be, right?
Yeah.
So it's all in that, like, that's really where the branding comes in. And again, it's not so much to sell more copies of the game, but to explain to players what they should expect, who it might be appealing to, and sending some of those clear signals. So again, more food for thoughts for myself, yourself, and other indie developers out there looking at different examples.
Now, do you have any impressions for the next game, Harpoon Arena?
I mean, immediately, so I picked up on the, I just clicked and the trailer came up, and my immediate thought was, whoa, this is really flashy. I actually like how simple it is. I have no clue what the game is, but I'm very curious immediately. It looks like it's high action. It looks like there's something going on. I like the colors. I like how vibrant it is. There's good contrast. There looks like there's a lot going on. But, even just from like the quick 3 seconds that I saw before I paused it, I'm like, okay, you have my attention, which is a good thing. But yeah, did you have a chance to actually play this one?
I did, but with a little caveat that it felt like, to my experience, that you really had to play this multiplayer to experience it, and I didn't have anyone to play with. It didn't really feel like it was viable to play this against bots.
Okay.
Maybe the developer intended you to play it against bots, but it felt like this really had to work as a PvP experience, and I didn't have anyone to play with, so.
And that's, I think, what's challenging when you have games that, are like that, because you're making a huge assumption that you're going to have an audience to back it up. And so, there's the meme of don't make an MMO as your first game, but one of the challenges, if you do go with something that requires having a player base, is you have to have that player base. And so you're almost setting yourself up for failure if you doubly don't even appeal to the hardcore audience, if you can't promise them having a core community that's there. And even games like Battle Right or Bloodline Champions, those are games that I really love. I think the most recent one in this genre of like the battle arena style was Supervive. It shut down, and it's just because they don't have the player bases. And these are companies who have backing, they have money, they have talent, all these different things. So, as an indie, it's even harder. We're fighting against those odds. So, you can certainly make those games. I think Pummel Party is probably one that did well and more friends based, but definitely one of those things you have to consider of like, how much are you going to indicate to other people that they should be sharing it with their friends? Obviously, it can work because Peak and some of these other games, very much did work, but PvP is much different because you're dealing against now having people get salty that they're bad at the game and what their friends could make them think of it because they had a bad experience. So it's just very hard.
Yeah. I think if you're going to do a multiplayer game, you either have to be really good at marketing and like have a proven record already with that, or have a publisher. Otherwise, I think your best bet is to go a direction more like Flawed Tactics, which he's been on the pod a couple of times. But yeah, async, but also like, if you really want to do live PvP, just have like a ramp towards that being viable. So like you have an async mode that people can play until there's enough of an audience that you can do the live PvP. I was at first I was very confused playing Harpoon Arena, and then after a moment I was like, wait a minute, this is Hook Wars. It was like, I remember this mod from Warcraft 3. It's really just Hook Wars.
That's cool.
So I know for sure that they could make a really fun game around this concept, because Hook Wars, they had a competitive scene going. There was plenty of depth to, like, I don't know which version you played, if you played it at all, but there were some versions that had a lot more character and skill set variety as well. And so you can definitely go deep with that mechanic. But yeah, it's going to be really hard as your first game. Well, I don't know for a fact that's this developer's first game, but yeah, without like a marketing team and a lot of experience, it's going to be hard to get a PvP game like this to take off.
But I would say this is a perfect game where if you just wanted to make it and have some fun, just make it, because there could be an audience where this is just like the player. There's only like 100 players, let's say, but those friends just love playing, with their small group of 4, and like this is their party game, their go-to game. They get together, and I think that there's, that's a totally viable outcome.
Yeah.
But also, it's very different than going out there and trying to do like $1 million in revenue, trying to make it. And I think when we go too far to the biz dev side and we only promote those games that can do well and have all the marketing behind it, we lose out on some of these things. That's just Hook War. Like, this is just a modern take on Hook War with robots. That's just cool. And so I hope that, if the developer's intention was just to make a game, I think this is this is a great level of polish. This is something where it's showing that, very clear, very flashy. And so, wherever they go from here, I'm sure they're going to be successful, because they're doing a lot of things that I see are like, again, vibrant, very good art, very good like action in the way that they're doing all the VFX. So I could see this, like their next game would just do very, very well. So I hope we get to see more from them.
Yeah, it struck me very much as someone's first Steam game, and I that can sound like a criticism. There's some jank to it and stuff, but I also think if you think about it through the lens of something I mentioned earlier, which is stepping stones, like if they just want to make multiplayer games eventually and they wanted to learn netcode and everything, like this was a great first project if your plan is to make multiplayer games, even if it's not successful. And I'm sure he learned a lot from it. And I think this game could also be successful. I think it just needs a lot more time and a lot more marketing if it's going to succeed in that way. But the guy clearly has talent, and I think it's a fun idea. It's just the demo was not there yet, and I don't think there's enough marketing buzz behind it for it to be successful. But as like you said, as a game you just make for the fun of it, for yourself, for your friends, or for what audience it finds, I think it's great. Yeah. That wraps up all of the NextFest games from the Discord. Do you have any other demos you played from NextFest that you'd like to talk about that weren't part of the Dream Dev community?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did was on the first day, went through and just kind of screened through to see like what was I getting recommended. The last NextFest, I actually did a whole video where I was looking at different games and wish listing them to see which ones could I come back to later and see how it performs. But this time around, there was one game. So there was one called Rogue Slime that I really, really liked the look of. I haven't had a chance to play it quite yet, but I thought that one was a game idea that I wanted to make. And I was surprised that someone else had it. And I'm like, okay, there's something here that I want to keep taking a look at. And the other one, let me see if I could find it. There was another one that I ended up playing and really, really enjoyed. I think it didn't save to my, I have to give me a sec to find on my wish list. But there was another one that I actually did play, and I thought it was a really great example of the level of polish that needs to be in a game to do well. And it was like it wasn't over polished, and it was just enough that I could get the idea of what to expect. And I was very excited to play, and it's called Guncrypt. And it's a very simple system where, kind of like Enter the Gungeon, kind of like these other games, but you could teleport and you could fire bullets and you would upgrade your bullets. So rather than getting different guns, you would get a revolver that as you shot different bullets, you could change the order of like what those bullets did. And so it was almost like a deck builder in a way where you're not necessarily shuffling, but you have to know what ammo is coming up next in different builds. So I thought there was a lot of things that it was doing that was very, very interesting. So again, I thought out of everything, it was like, this was the example of what someone should be striving for when you get to Steam Next Fest. It was equally polished across the board. I could see the start to end. There was some different systems in there. Sure, maybe it wasn't like the most perfect game in the world, but I really enjoyed playing it. And for me, that's like the gold standard that I'm thinking of, is like Guncrypt is what I need to be striving for, where I know that I've reached a level where it's ready to, get in front of an audience. So I hope that I can reach that level. It's a little bit more achievable than something like some like the AAA games that were in NextFest too. Like those are just unreachable for me right now.
Yeah, I didn't do a lot of free browsing of NextFest this time because I was just so busy with my own game demo.
Yeah.
There were a couple of other games I tried out though. One that really stuck out to me. There's actually another guy. He's kind of like the Connor of Jonas's Discord. He's just a really friendly, helpful guy who's like helping everybody. Uncertain Key. So kind of like Uncertainty, but with key at the end instead. He made a game called Rutrum, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right because it's kind of a fancy made up name, but it's a physics roguelike. It's kind of hard to describe. It's incredibly hard to describe. You would have to play it to get it, because it is another game that I think struggled with the sort of the UX and explainability of the game. So it's like, even having played it for as long as I did, it's still very difficult for me to understand the game and all of its mechanics. Yet somehow I still ended up playing it more than any other demo, because it was kind of addictive and a lot of fun. It was fun to explore all the game mechanics, even though they weren't explained very well. Once I did understand them, it was enough to keep me going, to keep trying to figure out more parts of the game. I don't know that I can necessarily say it was the best game, because like I said, it had a lot of flaws still as far as the demo and UX, but subjectively had the most fun playing it, which counts for something. So
it's funny, as I'm looking at this game, I just saw the static screenshots and I'm like, wait, is this just a Suika game?
Yep.
Absolutely is a Suika game, but it looks like it's taking a different aspect to the physics part of it, and more of like a roguelite where you're trying to do something with alchemy or some sorts. Looks very cool. I didn't see this one.
There was a lot of complexity to it. Like, you can kill enemies either by attacking them or just by unlocking the keys in their chest. And you get those keys by fulfilling certain quests, like having 2 different gems touch each other of different types and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's multiple ways of defeating opponents that will allow you to strategize more, rather than just connecting and combining, merging the biggest thing. You can be more tactical about trying to merge certain things next to each other to get a combo that gives you a key. So there's a lot of different depth and strategy to it, a lot of different mechanics. The roguelike elements are implemented well. And to me, this game is up there with Bloodsworn, or even higher in terms of the art identity of it. It's such a unique look that I think he pulled off so well. I think can be a little hard to read from the store page, what's going on, but once you actually play it, it's great. There's no problems with it at all. So no, this looks like one that has very high appeal, would want you to click, and it's just I think a great example of a game that just from the surface is something that's familiar but very clearly different. There's it's Suika and more, you would know, and I think anybody who has played Suika would be like, oh, I could jump into this and let me just see what it's about. Yeah, I mean, I didn't remember that's what the genre was called, but I did recognize the game mechanic.
Yeah.
But he definitely adds so much to it that even if you feel like you've played out that genre, there's a lot new here that I think you'd find fun. So
yep.
And then the other game I played was Jonathan Blow's latest game, The Order of the Sinking Star, something to that effect. Okay. It's kind of a long title. It's really good, but I made myself stop playing it because I would rather play the final game than it. It sort of felt like when I was playing it that he didn't make a very tailored experience for a NextFest demo. He just took the final game, cut some parts out to not spoil the story, and threw it up there. So it felt a little disjointed playing it, where I think to some extent the story is always going to be mystery based, so you're not going to understand everything at first, and you're gonna be slowly trickle fed things that help you understand things. But it felt a little bit too disjointed at the moment, story-wise. I feel like I'm supposed to understand more of this than I am. And I think that's just because he didn't really tailor it super well for the NextFest demo. But mechanically, it was a delight to play. And I definitely would want to play the final version of the game. So,
yeah, that's awesome to hear. I didn't check this one out, but you did bring up something interesting. Chris Z posted a recent article talking about that experience where players won't play a game because they don't want to get spoiled. And sometimes that's just the reality, where you might have a game that people are wishlisting and don't play for that reason. Likewise, you might have people who play the demo and have no interest in wishlisting your game just because they simply play every single game and want to check it out. So, that is something that I think we're all learning together in terms of NextFest, what it means, how it fits into the general game dev space. That, again, even we're just kind of looking at this from the quote unquote experts in the field, who are really trying to understand what needs to be there. And I don't think there's an established meta per se, but also one of the reasons why, sometimes you just got to try everything and do a little bit of all, but there are other parts of it where it is well known. You can't just go into NextFest with no wish lists. And I think the biggest thing that we saw proven out again is that games that already have a large wishlist following will come out with a multiplier effect. So if you have 0 wishlist, you're probably going to have very few coming out of it as well. So yeah, definitely just overall very interesting NextFest to like see all these different threads with so many different developers of different sizes and experience, and what their takeaways were for each of their games.
Yeah, there's a lot more we could talk about, but I think I've already taken up as much of your time as I can, so we'll just have to do this again sometime to touch on the things that we didn't get to. And there's plenty more we could talk about, but one thing I do want to briefly touch on before we wrap up is just this podcast and what the format of it could be like. This is kind of the first episode. We'll see how much time I end up spending on it. It's sort of the thing where you can find more and more ways to procrastinate from working on your game, and I don't want this to turn into that. But at the same time, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on what would add something new to the GameDev podcast, interview, talk show space, because I don't want to just be like, stepping on Blake's toes of the Dream Dev podcast and making something that's just kind of the same thing, but I'm a worse host. It's like, that's not going to help anybody. So what are your thoughts on what's maybe missing from the YouTube game dev space on YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this, and it was actually one of the recommendations you had in our little briefing too. Of, I think we're just not playing enough games. I think it would be really interesting to see more game developers enjoying games, playing games, talking about it, pulling things up, and I don't think that it needs to be from the standpoint of like being super entertaining, of like, making all this meme content, but really just like that director's cut of maybe seeing a demo of the game that the person is making, or doing a co-op game, like playing a favorite, Rocket League or something like that, and just talking about the experience and, going back and forth of some different cuts of, hey, let's here's some gameplay that we're doing, and chatting about it. Oftentimes I think where we can hone our taste as game developers is just, again, we've been talking about it the whole time, playing demos, seeing what other people are doing, being interested, and first being a fan of games first. And that will come through in the work. And they have this, with wine, beer, coffee, different experiences like that, where, there are people who just love getting into that detail. And I think we just don't have that for people who make video games too. So much of it is just on the biz dev side, or so much of it is on the entertainment side. But maybe there's something in the middle that we could start striking the middle with.
There's some thoughts I have about that kind of a format, but the one thing that you touched on when we very first started is that it can be kind of hard to talk while playing. So I don't know how well that format will work. But I think as long as the focus is on the talking and the playing is just something that you make progress as it comes naturally, rather than being the focus. So we're probably not going to play competitive games, just like load up a project. It's okay if the character and the game is standing still for a while we chat about something, but then pick it up again in a few moments. But yeah, it's a little bit iffy to try to talk and play at the same time. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, my thought was, we talked about nostalgic games that we have in common, and that just seems like, usually the first thing you do in a podcast is you get to know the person, their history. So a fun way to start might be to play a nostalgic game from their childhood and play that together on stream for a bit. And then move on to playing the guest game. And part of what inspires this idea for me was, what's the big podcast in game dev?
Thomas Brush?
Yeah, Thomas Brush. He will has some episodes recently where he'll have the guest open their game in Unity or Unreal or whatever, making it and showing it. And I saw that and was like, why isn't the whole podcast this way? It's like, that's so cool. I want to see the guts of the game. And so maybe not having them open the project, I don't know if everyone's comfortable with that, but even just playing the demo, I play the demo, the guest gets to talk through their decisions and why they made things certain ways. And you mentioned you played one of the NextFest demos with a developer. I think that was probably a fun experience for you, but I think it could be really fun as a podcast experience to play through a game's demo with a developer. And then I think it would just be really fun, like we did here, to have the guests send in, viewers send in games that they're working on that they'd like us to play. So I guess actually my request would be, if anyone's watching this, that in the comments leave the link to your game demo, and maybe we'll play it with the next guest on the podcast. So that's my idea for this podcast going through. So if you're interested in that, just stay subscribed to the channel. And I know that, Connor, you have a channel people can check out?
Yeah. So I have Sunday Brunch Studios on YouTube. I haven't been uploading videos as often, but if you're interested in just kind of keeping up with the work that I'm doing and my journey, you can go to sundaybrunchstudios.com, and I have a newsletter that you can sign up there. And every week you can just kind of see what it's like to be in my mind and see where I'm at, and maybe get some early previews as to the games that I'm releasing and knowing when I'm going to do a playtest and things like that too.
Yeah, on that note, how about we just make a little pact that the next time we do a podcast together, it'll be when you have a game demo for your next game coming up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will work on that. Yeah, I'll work on it and get it back to you as soon as possible.
All right. Well, I enjoyed talking with you, Connor, and I look forward to being able to do that again when you have a game demo up. Thanks for watching our discussion. If you'd like more episodes, comment with name ideas for the podcast, developers I should have as guests, and link to the Steam page for your own games for me to review with future guests. A big shout out to Blake's Dev Dream podcast. It's where me and Connor met, and all the games from this episode were from his community. Blake's podcast is the best game dev podcast out there, so check it out if you're not already subscribed.